Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the stars drift past the massive viewing screen. His forearms moved with practiced precision as he reviewed the latest reports from across the galaxy. The Kythera Empire had just finished conquering another world, bringing their total to 47 successful invasions under his command. The bridge crew worked silently around him. Each Kythera warrior stood 12 feet tall, their black shell-like skin gleaming under the ship's lights. Their faces showed no emotion as they carried out their duties. Fear was unknown to them. It was a weakness that other species possessed, but not the Kythera. "Commander," his second-in-command, Velthar, approached with measured steps. "We have received new orders from the High Command." Zethkar turned his massive head toward his subordinate. "What is our next target?" "A small world in the outer rim. Third planet from a yellow star. The inhabitants call it Earth." Velthar handed him a data crystal. "Initial scans show a primitive species. They call themselves humans." Zethkar inserted the crystal into his personal viewer. Images of the planet appeared before him. Blue oceans covered most of the surface, with green and brown continents scattered across the globe. Cities dotted the landscape, but they looked simple compared to Kythera technology. "How many of them are there?" Zethkar asked. "Approximately 8 billion individuals. They appear to be divided into many different groups. Our scouts report they fight among themselves constantly." Zethkar studied the data with interest. The humans looked so small and fragile. They had only 2 arms and stood barely half the height of a Kythera warrior. Their skin was soft and pink with no natural armor or weapons. They had no claws, no fangs, no poison glands. They seemed almost helpless. "What is their technology level?" he continued. "Primitive nuclear weapons. Basic space travel. They have only reached their own moon." Velthar paused. "They still use chemical propulsion for most of their vehicles. Their strongest weapons would barely scratch our shields." Zethkar nodded slowly. In 3,000 years of conquest, the Kythera had faced many different species. They had fought against the Crystalline Collective, whose warriors could shatter mountains with their bare hands. They had battled the Void Feeders, who consumed entire stars for energy. They had crushed the hive minds that controlled thousands of worlds at once. Each enemy had been different, but all had shared one thing in common. When faced with Kythera might, they had eventually surrendered or been destroyed. It was the natural order of the universe. The strong dominated the weak. "Show me their military forces," Zethkar commanded. More images appeared on the screen. Human soldiers carried small projectile weapons. Their vehicles moved on wheels or tracks across the ground. Their aircraft were slow and clumsy compared to Kythera fighters. Even their largest weapons seemed laughably weak. "They fight each other with these primitive tools?" Zethkar asked. "Yes, Commander. They have wars constantly. Our analysts believe this internal conflict will work in our favor. A species that cannot unite against its own kind will surely crumble when faced with external pressure." Zethkar had heard this before. Many species were divided among themselves, but unity came quickly when faced with extinction. The Kythera had learned to expect desperate alliances and last-minute cooperation from their enemies. It never mattered in the end. "What about their population centers?" he asked. "Concentrated in large cities. Most are poorly defended. They rely on their military to protect them, but their forces are scattered across the planet." Velthar brought up a tactical display. "Our standard invasion protocol should be more than sufficient." The standard protocol was simple and effective. Arrive in overwhelming force. Demonstrate superior firepower. Demand surrender. Most species gave up after seeing just one Kythera dreadnought. Those that didn't usually change their minds after watching a few of their cities disappear. "How long do the analysts predict this campaign will take?" Zethkar asked. 3 days, Commander. Perhaps less if they surrender immediately." Zethkar almost smiled. 3 days would make this the shortest campaign in his career. He had been hoping for a real challenge, something that would test his skills and honor his ancestors. Instead, he was being sent to discipline children. "Prepare the Third Fleet for departure," he ordered. "We will use minimal force. There is no honor in crushing insects. As Velthar moved to carry out the orders, Zethkar remained at the viewing screen. He thought about the humans and their small blue world. They seemed so peaceful from a distance. Their planet was beautiful, with swirling white clouds and sparkling oceans. It would be a shame to damage it too badly. The Cathara had rules about conquest. They preferred to leave worlds intact when possible. Damaged planets were less useful to the Empire. Besides, some of these humans might prove useful as workers or soldiers after they were properly trained. Zethkar had commanded enough invasions to know how they usually went. First came the shock and fear when the Cathara ships appeared. Then desperate attempts at resistance that accomplished nothing. Finally, the inevitable surrender when the enemy realized they could not win. He had seen the pattern dozens of times. Species that had ruled their own worlds for thousands of years would beg for mercy within hours of meeting Cathara forces. It was always the same. Fear broke them faster than weapons ever could. The bridge crew continued their preparations around him. Ships throughout the fleet received their orders and began moving into formation. Engines hummed to life as the massive vessels prepared for the jump to hyperspace. Zethkar took one last look at the tactical display. Earth hung there like a small blue jewel, unaware of what was coming. In 3 days, it would be just another conquered world in the growing Cathara Empire. The humans would learn their place in the universe, just as all the others had before them. The fleet jumped to hyperspace, carrying with them the absolute certainty that nothing in the universe could challenge Cathara supremacy. They had never been wrong before. They had no way of knowing they were about to discover what real fear felt like. The morning sun rose over Denver, Colorado, painting the Rocky Mountains in shades of gold and orange. People walked to work. Children played in parks, and traffic moved through the busy streets. It was a normal Tuesday morning until the sky went dark. Captain Jake Morrison was drinking coffee in the pilot ready room at Buckley Air Force Base when the alarm started screaming. Red lights flashed throughout the building as speakers crackled to life with urgent messages. Jake dropped his coffee cup and ran toward his F-35 fighter jet. Above the city, massive black shapes blotted out the sun. The Cathara warships were enormous, each one the size of a small mountain. They moved slowly through the atmosphere, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian. Smaller craft swarmed around them like angry insects. Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship, watching the human city below. Everything was proceeding according to plan. His ships had emerged from hyperspace exactly where intended. The humans would see this display of power and surrender within the hour. "Begin the demonstration," he ordered. Energy beams lanced down from the alien ships, striking empty fields outside the city. The weapons carved deep trenches in the earth, showing their devastating power. According to Cathara doctrine, this display would terrify the humans into immediate submission. Jake Morrison strapped himself into his fighter as his crew chief finished the pre-flight checks. Around him, other pilots were doing the same. None of them spoke about their chances. They all knew their missiles could barely scratch the alien hulls. But that didn't matter. Someone had to try. "All units, this is Control." The radio crackled. "You are cleared for takeoff. Godspeed." Jake's engine roared to life as he taxied onto the runway. Behind him, 11 other fighters followed. 12 aircraft against an entire alien fleet. The odds were impossible, but Jake had never backed down from a fight in his life. On the ground, people were not running in panic as the Cathara expected. Instead, they stood in the streets looking up at the alien ships with expressions of anger and determination. Some held up signs with crude messages. Others raised their middle fingers toward the invaders. Sergeant Lisa Carter was at the National Guard Armory when the attack began. She had been a Marine for 8 years before joining the Guard, and her first instinct was not to flee but to fight. She started gathering weapons and ammunition, preparing for what she knew was coming. "Listen up," she shouted to the dozen soldiers with her. "We're about to be invaded by aliens. I don't know what they want, but I know what we're going to give them. We're going to make them pay for every inch of our soil." The soldiers looked scared, but they nodded and began loading magazines and checking their equipment. Lisa knew they had little chance against advanced alien technology, but she also knew that Americans had never been good at giving up. Jake's fighter screamed through the sky toward the largest alien ship. His radar was going crazy as it tried to lock onto targets. The alien vessel was so massive that his targeting system couldn't find its edges. He switched to manual control and armed his missiles. Fox 1, he called out as his first missile launched. The weapon streaked toward the alien ship and exploded against its hull in a small flash of light. Jake could see no damage at all. The ship's shields absorbed the impact like it was nothing, but he kept firing anyway. Commander Zethkar watched the small human aircraft approach his fleet. He was puzzled by their behavior. The demonstration had clearly shown the humans that resistance was useless. Why were they still attacking? "Sir," Velthar reported, "the human aircraft are firing on our ships." "I can see that," Zethkar replied. "Are they causing any damage?" "None whatsoever. Their weapons cannot penetrate our shields." "Then why do they continue?" Velthar had no answer. In 47 previous conquests, no species had continued attacking after seeing the futility of their weapons. Most enemies retreated or surrendered at this point, but the humans kept coming. Jake emptied his missile pods at the alien ship. When his weapons were gone, he didn't turn back to base. Instead, he pushed his throttle forward and aimed his fighter directly at what looked like a command tower on the ship's hull. "Control, this is Morrison. I'm out of missiles and going in for a gun run." "Negative, Morrison. Return to base for rearm." "No can-do, Control. Tell my wife I love her." Jake's fighter slammed into the alien ship at 600 miles per hour. The explosion was tiny compared to the massive vessel, barely visible from the ground. But every human watching saw it happen. One man had given his life to strike back at the invaders. The other fighter pilots saw it too. Lieutenant Steve Collins was the next to run out of missiles. Like Jake, he didn't turn back. He followed his commander's example and rammed his aircraft into another alien ship. Commander Zethkar stared at the tactical display in confusion. 2 human pilots had just committed suicide attacks against his fleet. Their weapons had caused no significant damage, but they had died trying anyway. This behavior made no sense to him. "Sir," his communications officer reported, "we are receiving transmissions from the human population centers. Put them on screen." The main display showed images from around the human city. Instead of crowds begging for mercy, Zethkar saw people organizing resistance groups. A female in military uniform was teaching civilians how to make weapons from household items. Children were helping adults move supplies into underground tunnels. In one image, an elderly human in a wheelchair was showing younger people how to build explosive devices. In another, a teacher was leading students through subway passages, preparing hiding places and supply caches. "They are not surrendering," Velthar observed. "I can see that," Zethkar replied, his voice tight with confusion. More human aircraft were approaching his fleet. These were larger, carrying more weapons. They fired everything they had at the Cathara ships, then followed the example of their fallen comrades. One by one, they turned their aircraft into guided missiles, crashing into the alien vessels. Each impact was insignificant against the massive ships. But the psychological effect was something the Cathara had never experienced. These humans were choosing death over surrender. They were fighting with a desperation that seemed almost insane. For the first time in his long military career, Commander Zethkar felt something he could not identify. It was a cold sensation in his chest, a feeling that something was very wrong with this conquest. These humans were not behaving like any enemy he had ever faced. They were not afraid. Instead, they were making him afraid. Dr. Amanda Foster crouched in the ruins of what used to be the University of Chicago Library. Books were scattered everywhere, their pages fluttering in the wind that blew through the broken windows. She held a small recording device in her shaking hands, documenting everything she witnessed. "Day 3 of the invasion," she whispered into the device. "The aliens have taken most of the major cities, but something strange is happening. They expected us to surrender by now. Instead, people are fighting harder than ever." Amanda had spent her career studying human behavior, But what she was seeing now amazed even her. Normal people were doing extraordinary things. Yesterday, she watched a group of kindergarten teachers turn their school into a fortress. They used desks and filing cabinets to block windows and taught 5-year-old children how to hide and stay quiet. The Cathera ground forces had landed 2 days ago. Their soldiers were massive creatures in powered armor, carrying weapons that could melt steel. They moved through the streets like unstoppable machines, crushing everything in their path. But the humans refused to break. Ben Tucker had been teaching 3rd grade when the invasion started. Now he was leading 30 children through the abandoned subway tunnels beneath the city. The kids followed him without complaint, carrying backpacks full of food and water. They moved like tiny soldiers, learning to be silent and invisible. "Mr. Tucker," whispered 8-year-old Emma, "are the monsters still looking for us?" "Don't worry about the monsters," Ben replied quietly. "We're going to be okay. Just remember what I taught you about staying quiet." Ben had no military training, but he was learning fast. The children were learning too. They knew how to spot alien patrol routes and avoid the areas where the enemy was searching. They carried messages between different resistance groups, moving through spaces too small for adult humans. Helen Davis sat in her wheelchair in the basement of an apartment building, working on her latest project. At 73 years old, she looked like a harmless grandmother. Her gray hair was pulled back in a neat bun and she wore a flower print dress. But her hands were busy building explosive devices, from cleaning supplies and fertilizer. "The trick," she explained to the younger people around her, "is to make them think you're not dangerous. I've been walking past their checkpoints for days. They see an old lady in a wheelchair and assume I'm helpless." Helen had already destroyed 3 alien supply depots. She would roll up to the guards, smile sweetly, and ask for directions. While they were distracted by her innocent act, she would plant her homemade bombs in strategic locations. By the time the explosions went off, she was blocks away. Commander Zethkar paced back and forth on his bridge, studying reports from his ground commanders. The conquest should have been finished by now. Instead, his forces were bogged down in street to street, fighting with an enemy that refused to die. "Sir," Velthar approached with another datapad. "We have captured several human strongholds, but each victory costs us more than expected." "Explain," Zethkar demanded. "The humans rig their buildings to explode when we capture them. They destroy their own supplies rather than let us have them. Every position we take becomes a trap." Zethkar read the casualty reports with growing concern. The humans had primitive weapons, but they used them in ways the Cathera had never seen before. They didn't fight fair battles. Instead, they struck from shadows and disappeared like ghosts. Private Danny Ross had been captured 3 days ago during a failed attack on an alien command post. The Cathera had tortured him for information about human defenses, but Danny had told them nothing. Today, he had finally escaped from their prison ship. Danny was badly injured and barely able to walk, but he had one last mission to complete. He dragged himself through the alien vessel's corridors, looking for the communications array. His broken ribs screamed with every step, but he ignored the pain. When he found the array, Danny pulled out the explosives he had stolen from his captors. He had learned how their technology worked by watching the guards. Now he was going to use that knowledge against them. "This is for Jake Morrison and all the others," he whispered as he set the timer. The explosion tore through the ship's communication center, cutting off contact between the alien fleet and their ground forces. Danny died in the blast, but his final message was already broadcasting across every human radio frequency in the city. Never give up. Never surrender. Make them pay for every inch. Dr. Amanda Foster heard Danny's message on her radio and quickly recorded her observations. "The humans are not just fighting for survival," she spoke into her device. "They're fighting for ideas, freedom, dignity, revenge. These are concepts the aliens don't understand." She had been watching alien behavior too, and she noticed something important. The Kythera soldiers were starting to hesitate before entering buildings. They moved more carefully through the streets. Some of them looked around nervously, as if expecting attacks from every shadow. "The invaders are learning to be afraid," Amanda whispered. They came here expecting easy prey, but they found something else instead. They found humans. Sergeant Lisa Carter had turned the Denver suburbs into a war zone. Every house was a potential ambush point. Every playground had hidden weapons caches. She had organized the neighborhood families into fighting units, teaching them guerrilla warfare tactics. Remember, she told a group of soccer moms, we're not trying to win battles. We're trying to make them afraid to leave their ships. Every time they step outside, they should wonder if they're going to make it back alive. The women nodded grimly. Yesterday they had been worrying about school fundraisers and grocery shopping. Today they were learning how to make the most dangerous creatures in the galaxy look over their shoulders in fear. Commander Zethkar reviewed the psychological profiles his analysts had prepared on human behavior. The reports made no sense to him. Humans fought harder when they were losing. They became more dangerous when they were wounded. They chose death over surrender, as if dying for their beliefs was somehow victory. Sir, his medical officer reported, we are seeing increased stress reactions among our troops. Many are requesting transfers away from ground duty. Zethkar stared at the report in disbelief. Kithara warriors requesting transfers because they were afraid? It was impossible. His species had never known fear, yet the evidence was right in front of him. On the viewing screen, he watched footage of human resistance fighters, children carrying supplies through dangerous areas, elderly people building weapons in basement workshops, teachers and parents, and grandparents all working together to make his soldiers' lives miserable. For 3,000 years, the Kithara had conquered through superior force and intimidation. But intimidation only worked on species that could be intimidated. These humans seemed to take strength from their fear, turning it into rage and determination. Zethkar realized with growing horror that he might have made a terrible mistake. He had not invaded a planet full of weak prey animals. He had invaded a world full of creatures that would drag him into hell alongside them and call it victory. Carlos Martinez crawled through the ventilation shaft of the alien power facility. His engineer's tools clutched in his sweating hands. The nuclear plant had been captured by the Kithara 3 weeks ago, and they were using it to power their occupation forces. Carlos had worked at this plant for 15 years before the invasion. He knew every pipe, every circuit, every safety system. But today, he was not here to fix anything. He was here to break it in the most terrible way possible. Carlos had studied the alien fusion reactors they had installed alongside the human equipment. The technology was advanced, but the basic principles were the same. He knew exactly how to make them fail, and more importantly, he knew how to make them fail in a way that would kill as many invaders as possible. This is for my daughter Maria, he whispered as he began rewiring the safety controls. Maria had been killed in the first day of fighting, along with thousands of other children. The aliens claimed they were trying to minimize casualties, but Carlos had seen the bodies. Kithara didn't care about human lives. Now he was going to show them what that really meant. Maya Johnson sat in the ruins of her art studio, working on her latest sculpture. The piece was made from the armor and weapons of dead Kithara soldiers, twisted and shaped into something that hurt to look at. She had been broadcasting images of her artwork across the alien communication networks for days. Maya had discovered something interesting about the Kithara. They had specific fears built into their psychology, phobias that existed in their alien minds. Her sculptures were designed to trigger those fears, to create images that would haunt the invaders long after they stopped looking. The latest piece showed a Kithara warrior trapped inside a cage made from human bones, reaching desperately toward a light that would always remain out of reach. Maya knew that Kithara feared being confined, being helpless. This sculpture would appear in their nightmares. Art should make people feel something, she said to herself, as she welded another piece into place. Even if what they feel is terror. 17-year-old Alex Chen sat in his bedroom, his computer connected to dozens of hacked alien systems. The Kithara had superior technology, but they had made a mistake. They assumed humans were too primitive to understand their systems. Alex had proven them wrong. For the past week, Alex had been systematically destroying Kithara historical records. He deleted their military victories, their cultural achievements. their proud lineage going back thousands of years. In place of their history, he inserted human propaganda showing the mighty Cathara Empire being defeated by primitive Earth creatures. "How does it feel to be forgotten?" Alex typed as he uploaded another virus into their network. "How does it feel to have your legacy erased by a teenager with a laptop?" Alex had learned that the Cathara greatest fear was being forgotten, having their deeds fade into nothing. Every record he destroyed was like a knife in their cultural heart. He was killing their sense of identity one file at a time. Commander Zethkar stood in his private quarters, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He barely recognized himself. His once proud posture was hunched with stress. His eyes darted, nervously, looking for threats that might not exist. He had not slept properly in days. The reports from his subordinates grew worse each day. Cathara soldiers were refusing direct orders. Some had barricaded themselves in their quarters, afraid to go outside. Others had requested immediate transfer to any other assignment, anywhere but Earth. Yesterday, one of his most experienced sergeants had broken down completely. The veteran warrior, who had fought in 20 successful campaigns, now spent his time rocking back and forth in a corner, mumbling about human children with dead eyes and smiling faces. "Sir." Velthar entered the room without his usual confident stride. "We have another incident to report." "What now?" Zethkar asked wearily. Engineering Team 7 discovered human artwork in the captured power station. The images were disturbing. 3 of our warriors had to be sedated after viewing them. Zethkar closed his eyes. The human psychological warfare was unlike anything in their military manuals. They didn't just attack Cathara bodies, they attacked their minds. Every human seemed to understand instinctively how to create maximum psychological damage. "There's more, sir," Velthar continued. "Our historical archives have been compromised. Someone has been deleting our records and replacing them with human propaganda." "How much have we lost?" "Approximately 60% of our cultural database. The damage appears to be spreading to other ships in the fleet." Zethkar felt something crack inside his mind. 60% of their history, gone. Thousands of years of Cathara achievements, wiped out by a single human child with basic technology. It was impossible, but it had happened. The nuclear plant. Explosion lit up the night sky like a second sun. Carlos Martinez had succeeded in his final mission. The alien fusion reactors had failed exactly as he planned, creating a chain reaction that destroyed the entire facility and everyone inside. The blast took out 3 city blocks and killed over 2,000 Cathara troops. But the explosion was not the worst part. The worst part was Carlos's final broadcast, transmitted across all frequencies as the reactors went critical. "This is Engineer Carlos Martinez to all Cathara forces. You killed my daughter, you killed my neighbors, you killed my friends. But you made one mistake. You left me alive long enough to show you what human revenge looks like. This is what happens when you threaten our families. This is what happens when you come to our world thinking we're weak. We don't just fight back. We make you pay a price that will haunt your species forever." The message was recorded and broadcast by every human resistance cell. Soon it was playing on loudspeakers across the occupied territories. Children sang it as a playground rhyme. Adults whispered it as they worked in their hidden weapons factories. Maya Johnson's latest sculpture was projected onto the side of every major building in the city. The image of the trapped Cathara warrior spread through the alien fleet's communication systems like a virus. Soldiers who saw it began experiencing panic attacks. Some refused to leave their posts. Others demanded to be sent home immediately. Alex Chen's computer viruses had infected 90% of the Cathara database systems. Ancient victories were replaced with stories of defeats. Heroic ancestors became cowards fleeing from human children. The proud history of the Cathara Empire was being rewritten by a teenager who had never left his bedroom. Commander Zethkar received a priority message from the High Command. Other Cathara fleets throughout the galaxy were reporting strange behavior from their troops. Soldiers who had never shown fear were now afraid to enter combat. Veterans were having nightmares about a small blue planet and its inhabitants. "Sir," Velthar reported, his voice shaking. We're receiving surrender requests from over half our ground forces. They're asking to be evacuated immediately. Zethkar stared at the tactical display showing Earth. The planet looked so small and harmless, but it had broken his army without firing a shot. These humans had done something that no enemy in 3,000 years had accomplished. They had taught the Kethra to be afraid. The fear was spreading through his fleet like a disease. Soon it would reach other worlds, other species. Everyone would know that the mighty Cathara Empire had been defeated not by superior weapons or numbers, but by the sheer determination of creatures they had thought were primitives. Zethkar realized that this war was already over. The question now was whether his species would ever recover from what the humans had done to them. Some wounds never healed. Some fears never went away. The humans had not just defeated the Kithara, they had created a legend that would haunt the galaxy for generations to come. General Patricia Wells crouched behind the concrete barriers outside the Kithara breeding facility. The alien complex stretched for miles underground, hidden beneath what used to be a shopping mall in suburban Atlanta. Her small team of Special Forces soldiers waited for her signal, their faces grim behind their tactical masks. This was humanity's last desperate gamble. The war had been going on for 2 months now, and while the humans had inflicted terrible psychological damage on the Kithara, they were still losing. The aliens controlled most of the major cities and had superior numbers. Patricia needed to find a way to break them completely, not just scare them. Intel says this is where they grow their young, she whispered to Sergeant Ryan Kelly, her communication specialist. If we can get inside and learn how their minds work, maybe we can end this war. Ryan nodded and checked his equipment one more time. He was the best computer hacker in the military, but he had never tried to break into an alien system that created living beings. Today would be a first for everyone. The facility's outer defenses were lighter than expected. The Kithara had pulled most of their troops back to defensive positions, afraid to venture out into areas where humans might be hiding. Fear was making them weak, but Patricia knew it wasn't enough. She needed to destroy something deeper than their courage. Inside the breeding facility, the team moved through corridors lined with strange organic pods. Each pod contained a developing Kithara warrior, floating in nutrient fluid that glowed with soft blue light. But these were not ordinary children. Patricia could see neural interfaces connected to each pod, feeding information directly into the growing brains. "My God," whispered Dr. Rebecca Stone, the team's psychologist. "They're programming their young before they're even born." Ryan plugged his equipment into one of the neural interfaces and began downloading data. What he found on the alien systems shocked him. The Kithara didn't develop courage naturally. Instead, they implanted artificial memories of victory and conquest into every newborn mind. "General," Ryan said quietly, "their fearlessness isn't real. They're basically brainwashing their own children to think they're invincible." Patricia understood immediately. The Kithara Empire was built on a lie. Their warriors weren't naturally brave. They were programmed from birth to believe they could never lose. That was why human resistance had broken them so completely. When reality didn't match their programming, their minds couldn't handle it. "Can you change the programming?" she asked. Ryan's fingers flew over his keyboard as he studied the alien systems. "I think so. Their technology is advanced, but the basic neural patterns are similar to human brain structures. I can replace their courage memories with something else." "What did you have in mind?" Ryan smiled grimly. "How about we show them what real courage looks like?" For the next 6 hours, Ryan worked to hack into the breeding facility's main computer. He uploaded terabytes of data from the human resistance movement. Videos of Jake Morrison ramming his fighter into an alien ship. Audio recordings of Carlos Martinez's final broadcast. Images of Helen Davis building explosives in her wheelchair. Stories of children carrying messages through subway tunnels and teachers leading civilians to safety. But Ryan didn't just add human memories to the Kithara programming. He replaced their artificial courage with something more powerful. He gave them the ability to feel doubt, to question their orders, to wonder if their cause was just. He gave them the capacity for independent thought. "It's done," Ryan announced. The next generation of Cathara warriors will grow up with human memories alongside their own. They'll know what real bravery looks like, and they'll know that their empire's victories came from programming, not strength. Patricia looked at the thousands of pods surrounding them. In a few months, these young Cathara would emerge with minds that had been touched by human courage. They would ask questions their parents had never been able to ask. They would see their empire's history through human eyes. The team planted explosives throughout the facility as they retreated, but the real damage had already been done. The future of the Cathara species had been forever changed by a computer virus carrying the memory of human resistance. Commander Zethkar received the news of the breeding facility's destruction with numb acceptance. He had lost the ability to feel. Surprise! Every day brought fresh disasters, new ways that humans found to hurt his people. But this attack was different. This one struck at the very heart of what made the Cathara who they were. "Sir," Velthar reported, "we're receiving communications from the High Command. They're ordering a complete withdrawal from Earth." Zethkar nodded slowly. The order was not unexpected. Half his fleet had already requested transfer to other assignments. His ground forces were useless, too afraid to leave their fortified positions. The mighty Third Fleet had been reduced to a collection of terrified soldiers hiding from an enemy they no longer understood. "Prepare the ships for departure," he ordered. "We leave in 6 hours." As the Cathara fleet lifted off from Earth's surface, they left behind more than just a conquered planet. They left behind their certainty, their pride, and their faith in their own invincibility. The humans had taken something from them that could never be replaced. The story of Earth spread through the galaxy like wildfire. Other species heard about the small blue planet where the mighty Cathara Empire had been broken by creatures half their size. They learned about humans who fought not because they were programmed to be brave, but because they chose to be brave. Planets that had been planning rebellion against other oppressive empires suddenly found new courage. Species that had been conquered centuries ago began to whisper about freedom. The human example became a symbol of hope throughout the galaxy. On Earth, people emerged from their hiding places to see the alien ships disappearing into space. They had won, not through superior weapons or technology, but through something much more powerful. They had won through their refusal to surrender their humanity. Dr. Amanda Foster stood in the ruins of Chicago, still recording her observations. "The war is over," she spoke into her device. "The Cathara have retreated, but the victory belongs to everyone who fought. From the pilots who gave their lives in the first attack to the children who carried messages through the tunnels. Every human who refused to give up contributed to this moment." General Patricia Wells received reports from around the globe. The aliens were gone, but their legacy remained. Humanity had learned something important about itself during the invasion. They had discovered that their greatest strength was not their technology or their numbers, but their absolute refusal to accept defeat. Months later, the first generation of reprogrammed Cathara warriors emerged from their breeding pods. They looked at their empire's history with new eyes that had been touched by human courage. They asked questions that no Cathara had ever asked before. They wondered if conquest was really necessary, if fear was really strength, if their ancestors had been heroes or monsters. The Cathara Empire began to crumble from within as its young warriors refused to follow orders that seemed unjust. They had been infected with something their species had never known before, the ability to choose their own path. Commander Zethkar spent his remaining years on a remote colony world, staring at the stars and trying to forget the sound of human laughter echoing through the ruins of Denver. But he could never forget. None of them could. The humans had left scars on the Cathara soul that would last forever. The galaxy had learned a new truth. There were worse things than death, worse things than defeat. There was the knowledge that somewhere among the stars lived a species so determined, so absolutely unwilling to surrender, that they would drag their enemies into hell alongside them and call it victory. Humanity had not conquered the galaxy through force. They had conquered it through reputation alone. Their legend spread to every world, every species, every corner of space. The small blue planet became known as the place where the impossible happened, where the weak became strong and the strong learned to fear. And in the darkness between stars, other empires looked toward Earth and made a simple decision. Some fights were not worth fighting. Some enemies were too dangerous to awaken. Some species were better left alone.